Usually we'd be sitting on the atrium floor in the middle of the IMF where finance ministers and central bankers get together to hash out the world's problems. Where is the coordination right now? Is it happening?
Hello, good morning. And yeah, that would be fun to do it that way, but this is working fine. The coordination is happening in video conferences. So we just had one this morning with the G20 group. And then yesterday there was one of the G7 finance ministers. So it's, I think, very good coordination, though it's more by video.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking to, President Trump yesterday announcing he's suspending funding for the World Health Organization for what he says is severely mismanaging the crisis, starting from COVID-19 in China, and just separate countries going their own ways in terms of fiscal stimulus and support, monetary stimulus and support. It feels very different than, say, the Great Recession and other periods in history where the world got together, especially in dealing with a health crisis. I mean, do you wish we'd see more of that?
There is a lot of coordination. For example, what the World Bank has, we now, by the end of April, will have 100 programs in 100 countries that have health emergency programs where there can be bulk purchasing and there can be financing by other operations. And so there's good coordination on that. We do a needs assessment that involves many parts of the international community. And with regard to your point about what individual countries are doing, I think that's to be supported, meaning the U.S. is doing things that it wants to do in the U.S. that are effective, and in Europe, they're trying to find effective measures. So my sense is there's good coordination. We saw that today in the G20 communique, where the 20 large economies in the world called for debt moratorium for bilateral official debt, and that's $165 billion of debt that we'll have through the end of the year before any payments are due on it. So that's very good coordination, and it included China. So I want to add that in. It's really a global effort to help the poorest countries.
As you are trying to help the developing world and the poorest countries, are you relying on the Chinese data on the pandemic? Do you trust that information?
What I've tried to do is focus on the problems that I can deal with. And so those are getting a lot of programs that have broad a menu of actual equipment, personal protection equipment that can be used in hospitals by nurses, by the frontline healthcare providers. So that's been our big focus. And then what we're going to be doing, the World Bank will be doing $160 billion of financing over the next 15 months for the economic rebuilding that needs to be done. Of course, more money is needed for developing countries. The other multilateral development banks are putting in what looks like $80 billion. And so we'll have a total of $240 billion from those institutions. And the IMF is also doing several initiatives that will be very helpful. So I think the world effort is focused on trying to get to a very broad response to COVID.
How is the developing world doing with this pandemic? And are you worried at all about a surge in places with crowded cities and difficult access to clean drinking water and crowded slums and healthcare systems that are not up to the task? Give us a sense of what you're seeing and what you expect there.
I'm glad you focused on that. This is a huge problem. The world recession will be deep, and that especially impacts poorer countries. And many of the cities in poor countries are overcrowded, don't have good transit facilities, and that itself is bad with COVID. So we're trying to work on that, but it becomes country by country support efforts. I was just looking this morning at Nigeria efforts, the efforts that we'll be taking in Nigeria. Many of the very populous countries need extra support right now, and they also need programs, and I'm glad you said clean water, access to electricity, sanitation. These are all critical problems that that I think some progress can be made on. But the big worry is that we're moving backward right now because of the global recession.
How long at the bank do you guys see this recession lasting? I mean, we know it's going to be deep and severe, but I think the question is how long it takes to get out of it.
Yeah, some part of that depends on the developed world. You know, the U.S. is the world's biggest economy, and can be critical in the global growth outlook. Europe itself is important. Japan and China, of course, are important in this mix. And so the thing that would help the developing world the most is strong growth in the developed world. That means the working capital for small businesses. I'm worried that as the central banks have a mismatch of their maturity, it doesn't provide the working capital at the short end for growth by small businesses, which is one of the critical job engines. We're trying to do that in the developing world through the IFC. That's part of the World Bank. The International Finance Corporation is providing directly working capital lines of credit to keep small businesses open so that they can be ready for a recovery.
Well, as you know, so many of those developing nations, especially in Asia, depend on a strong China. Has China contained the virus?
I don't know about the virus. I know I can't comment on that. But one thing I do take note of that's going on in the world is in many previous crises, the currencies have moved a lot, have been one of the weak points. But in this particular crisis, the major currencies have been steadier than in the past. And I think that's a very good sign. One of the things I worked on when I was in the U.S. administration was the importance of the stability of currencies. And that's been in the communiques of the G20 and of the IMF communiques. And so far, that's been a source of some small part of stability in this crisis, and I welcome that.
I wonder if your views have changed at all since going from the administration to the World Bank, which is so much more globally focused. There is this realization now that we are so dependent on the global supply chain and on China for critical things like pharmaceuticals and like medical equipment and supply, and whether that should be changed. What's your view on that, and has it evolved?
Well, these are very important questions of how extended do you want your supply chains to be, and how interrelated to countries around the world. What systems do you want to have be vital from your security standpoint, from your supply line standpoint? And so I think the world needs to think about what's the most effective system to be efficient from an economic standpoint, and also to be balanced from a security standpoint. So at the World Bank, one of the things that I stress is the importance of trade facilitation and the ability of supply chains to adjust to the changing circumstances. That means countries have to allow a dynamic process for their supply chains, because sometimes special interests try to stop that kind of change. And so we have to let markets actually function even during the crisis now, and be ready for the rebound phase on the next side.
Should the U.S. relax some of the tariffs that are in place against China and other countries in the middle of this global recession?
I don't know about that, but I favor markets that function and are open, and that invite new suppliers when those can be brought in. And I think there is value clearly in having suppliers close to home, but I think there's also very great value in having China having had growth over the last 20 years or so, really starting in 1978. It's been one of the gainers in the world in terms of alleviating poverty, and that also is welcome. And I noted earlier, China's participating in this debt moratorium on debt service, and they're one of the biggest creditors in the world now. And so it's very welcome for the world to see China participating in that.
David Malpass, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.